see we have the slides up so we can get started. The EU Observatory is really a bit of a different product compared to what we have seen today. So it is not a tool specifically for Safe by Design, but it's really more of a platform for improving the whole transparency around nanomaterials and improving communication around the subject. And it's basically aimed at bringing clarity to the whole discussion about the safety of nanomaterials. And Blanca was earlier talking in her presentation about the importance of fostering trust, consumer trust in the safety of whatever is put on the market. And in order to achieve that, there needs to be information available, and the information has to be accessible and understandable to different audiences. So this is where the observatory really comes in, and a bit of perhaps background about how this started. There has been for some time the feeling that, let's say, there is insufficient information in the public domain about the safety of nanomaterials. And a few years back, some member states already started, some EU member states started to create their own registries for nanomaterials. And at that point, the EU Commission also decided to look and see if there is a need for an EU-wide solution to address this problem of transparency. And they looked at a number of different solutions, and these included things like having an EU-wide registry where industry would have to submit certain information, or an observatory, or the option of doing nothing, which is basically the situation as it was. And as with many things, the Commission did an impact assessment to look at the positives and negatives of these different options, and decided that the observatory it would be the best option to address this issue. And because ECHA, as an agency managing REACH, already has a lot of experience with managing databases around chemicals and disseminating information that we collect, the Commission decided to give us this task and to give us some resources to achieve this goal. So next slide, please. So the goal of the observatory basically is to give reliable information about the market and safety of nanomaterials, like I was said. And this information would help the general public, but also the industry, and it would aim at taking account, let's say, the most up-to-date information coming from different research projects and different tools that are being developed by EU funding. So next point, please. So the observatory is supposed to do this in, let's say, three ways. So first of all, we are supposed to collect the available information about nanomaterials from many different existing sources. So this includes information coming from regulations like REACH, which ECHA manages, but also from information from different research projects, information coming from different regulations. Next point, please. And then the observatory is supposed to take this information and see if there are, let's say, some knowledge gaps. And where there are knowledge gaps, we would conduct external studies to try to fill those knowledge gaps. And finally, next point, please. And very importantly, this information that we collect and that we generate is supposed to be then presented in an accessible and a friendly way to the public. Next slide, please. So when we got this task from the EU Commission back in December of last year, we decided that we will build up the observatory in a stepwise approach, meaning that we will have a first launch, which actually happened in June of this year, and then we will improve that in a couple of different steps by mid of next year, and then by roughly June of 2019. And we did this because we wanted to make sure that we can put the product out there as quickly as possible, and then have a chance for people to give us their feedback. But it still gives us a chance to improve the product in general. And the first launch was really about using the content that we as the agency have already available, and using synergies from information that we have. So our databases, putting some content around that, and giving the public the ability to search some of this information that we have on nanomaterials. And then for the next phases, we intend to expand on that. So we will have more edited content, and we will be adding more and more information coming from different databases. So next slide, please. So like I said, we launched the Observatory back in June of this year. And what I'm showing you here is really just the landing page of the Observatory. It's not my intention to go through the different sections here today, but what I wanted to highlight is that we are trying to provide different information for different audiences. So we have a general information on uses, information on safety, information on the different regulations that apply to nanomaterials across the EU, and also providing information on research and innovation surrounding nanomaterials. So we have a number of different audiences for the Observatory, and of course a challenge for us is to make sure that the content and the messages in there really fit for our different audiences. So next slide, please. So like I was saying, we plan to now expand the information we have on the Observatory, and we're already working on that here at the agency. And we plan to do that by, let's say, by harvesting as much information as we can that is out there. So for the next launch that we have planned for mid of next year, we plan to add at least the following. So we will add this nano database, and I'm not sure if people are in the audience are familiar with this, but the Commission, DG RTD especially, developed had this project called Nano Data that is providing information about markets, about innovation, and also about safety for nanomaterials, and we plan to integrate that within the Observatory. Then we will plan to use information, or to put up information that's coming from different EU-funded research projects, and we will do this at least for the next stage by integrating or doing a light integration with a tool called eNanoMapper that has been developed, that will allow basically the user of the Observatory to search for information that's in this database and present it to them on the Observatory interface. Then we also plan to provide information coming from different national registries on nanomaterials. So I mentioned that some member states, including France, Denmark, Belgium, have set up their own inventories, and we are looking at how we can use that information also on the Observatory. And also we plan to harvest, collect information that's coming from different EU sources, so different EU agencies that might be dealing with nanomaterials, EFSA for foods and feeds, the European Medicines Agency, EU OSHA, and really all information sources that we can find across the EU. Next slide, please. And then we already have in mind, so if you remember, I mentioned that the observatory will conduct external studies, and we already have 2 studies in the pipeline now. So one will be looking at risks and hazards of well-known pigments in consumer products. And then we will be looking also at doing a study that is looking at how market studies are normally done, different parameters and that are used in such studies, and the reliability of the available information. So next slide, please. So basically for the next phase, I explained to you a bit about what we plan to add in there, and we will continue to develop the observatory for next year and the coming years. But at the same time, there are some messages in there that are important to keep in mind. So first of all, transparency is quite important for us, not just for the observatory, but for the agency. And I mentioned it will be important for the audience here today, because the main aim really is to ensure that there is enough information in the public, and that will hopefully help improve the situation, the perception about how much information there is. So we are trying to be a trustworthy, a neutral source of information on nanomaterials in the EU. But at the same time, in order for us to succeed, we are dependent on the buy-in from different partners, from the different stakeholders that we use. So this is a bit different compared to things like the REACH regulation, where companies are required to submit a certain amount of information. Here, we are going out and collecting the information, but that means that the information that we can collect depends a bit on how much cooperation we have from our partners. And one final but very important point is that the whole discussion about the safety of nanomaterials is interlinked. That there is different aspects to that. So there is the observatory, which is trying to improve transparency, but there is the ongoing review of the REACH annexes for nanomaterials, and also the ongoing review of the EU recommendation for the definition of a nanomaterial. And these will also have an impact on the amount of information that is then finally available to the public on the safety of nanomaterials. So it's important to keep those elements in mind as we move forward in the future, but with providing information and also with making sure that nanomaterials, the safety of nanomaterials, is properly addressed. So with that, I end my presentation, and I'm here for any questions that you can have.